What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week on Not Your Average Meta, we have the last video of our 3-game series we played with my friends in Roselle. For this game, 3 of us decided to break out Dimir decks while Chris played the only dimir-esque deck he had with him. First up, we have Eddie playing a modified pre-con of Wilhelt the Rotcleaver. This is a zombie tribal deck that looks to run over the board with all kinds of zombies in order to win the game. Next up, we have Chris playing his dimir-esque Grist the Hungertide deck. This deck looks to mill insects into his graveyard so he can run over the board with all his creepy crawly bugs. Then we have Justin playing Silumgar the Drifting Death. This is a Changelings disguised as Dragons tribal Voltron deck. With this deck, he's looking to suit up Silumgar with equipment and take out his opponents with commander damage. Lastly, we have Foggrow playing his new Ludevic Necrogenius deck. This deck looks to take advantage of transforming Ludevic into a copy of an unblockable creature or another creature of value in order to take out his opponents with commander damage. Now that we have our fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Chris plays a Verdant Catacombs and takes a life to go fetch up a Bayou. Justin draws and plays a Command Tower. Fog draws and plays a Snow-Covered Island. Eddie draws and plays an Unclaimed Territory naming Zombies. Chris draws and plays an Untapped Undergrowth Stadium. Justin draws and plays a Swamp before passing. Fog draws and plays a Snow-Covered Swamp, then he casts an Avalanche Caller for 2. Eddie draws and plays his own Snow-Covered Swamp for turn, then taps 2 for Jadar. He then creates a Decayed Zombie on his end step. Chris plays a Swamp for turn, then taps out to cast his commander Grist. He then upticks Grist to make a 1/1 insect token and mill a card off his library, hitting a land. Justin draws and plays an island. He then taps through to cast Bloodline Pretender, naming Dragons. Fog draws for turn and plays another Snow-Covered Swamp. He then taps through for Blood Pact, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life, before going to combat and making a statement by swinging to Eddie for 1. Eddie plays another Snow-Covered Swamp for turn, then taps 3 to cast Crowded Crypt. He then goes to combat swinging his Decayed Zombie Grist for 2. At the end of combat, the zombie dies and he creates another Decayed Zombie at his end step. Chris draws for turn, then taps 3 to cast Crawling Sensation before uptaking Grist to mill a card, hitting a creature and getting an insect token. Justin draws for turn, then plays another island before tapping 3 for Venomous Changeling. Fog draws and plays another Snow-Covered Island. He then taps 3 for Behold the Multiverse, scrying 2 then drawing 2 cards. He then discards the hand size and passes. Eddie plays an untapped Sunken Hollow for turn, then taps 3 for Digraph Colossus. He then taps another 2 for Blade Stitch Scab, creating a tapped zombie token. He then goes to combat and swings his Decayed Zombie Grist again. Chris blocks with the insect, and at the end of turn, the zombie dies, putting a counter on the crypt. Then at his end step, he creates another Decayed Zombie. Chris starts his turn by milling a card off the top of his library, then draws for turn. He then upticks Grist, milling a card and creating an insect token. He then taps 3 for a Crucible of Worlds and plays his Catacombs from his graveyard for turn, paying 1 life to crack it and go get a land. Justin draws and taps 3 for Commander Sphere before passing turn. Fog draws for turn and plays an Evolving Wilds. He then taps 2 to cast his Commander Ludevic, milling a card when he enters the battlefield. Fog then cracks his Evolving Wilds to go get a land, then taps 2 to cast Infernal Grasp to destroy Eddie's Colossus while losing 2 life. This then puts a counter on Eddie's crypt. Eddie plays a Snow-Covered Island for turn, then taps out to cast Eternal Skylord, creating a zombie army amassing 2. Eddie then swings his Decayed Zombie Grist for 3 in the air and a zombie token Fog in the air for 3. His Decayed Zombie then dies after combat, putting a counter on his crypt before getting another Decayed Zombie. At the end of his turn, Chris sacks an insect token and casts Village Rites, drawing 2 cards. Chris mills 2 cards to start his turn, then draws. He then plays a Forge and upticks Grist, milling a card and creating an insect token. He then repeats his process again, milling another card, hitting an insect, and getting another insect token. He then does this a 3rd time, milling a card and hitting a land. Kristen pays 3 to cast Blex and passes. Justin draws and taps out to cast Distant Melody, Picking Dragons, and draws 2 cards. He then plays an island and passes. Fog draws and pays 5 to activate Ludevic, flipping him over to Ulog, exiling 1 creature from his graveyard. He then has Ulog become a copy of Frostpire Arcanist with an additional +1/+1 counter. He then swings 5 at Chris, who blocks with an insect. On attack, he then casts Defense Straight for free on Eddie's Skylord, killing him and putting a counter on Eddie's Crypt. Eddie draws for turn and taps 4 to cast his commander Wilhelt. Eddie then goes to combat and swings all his zombies at Fog, who takes a hit going down to 24. His decayed zombie then dies, putting a counter on his crypt. He then sacks his zombie token to Wilhelt, drawing a card and getting another counter. He then puts 2 new decayed zombies into play and passes. Chris starts his turn milling 2 cards and getting an insect token. He then draws for turn and plays a swamp. Chris then upticks to Grist, milling a card off the top of his library, hitting an insect and creating an insect token. He then repeats this process, milling a card, getting 1 more insect token. He then taps 4 for Saber Ants and goes to combat, swinging 2 insects at Eddie and 2 at Justin. Justin doesn't block, taking the 4, while Eddie blocks both the insects attacking him. Justin draws and taps 6 to cast his commander Silumgar, putting a counter on his Bloodline Keeper. Fog draws and plays a snow-covered island. He then taps 6 to cast Dreadhound, milling 3 cards. He hits 1 creature, which has each opponent losing 1 life. Fog then goes to combat and swings his commander at Eddie for 5, and on attack casts Geist Wave, bouncing his Avalanche Caller back to hand, drawing a card. Eddie doesn't block and takes the 5 commander damage. Eddie plays the command tower for turn, then goes to combat, sending all his zombie tokens to Justin, who doesn't block and goes down to 26. The 2 decayed zombies then die, dealing 2 damage each of Fog's opponents. Eddie then sacks his zombie armor to his commander, drawing a card, and puts 2 more decayed zombies into play. Chris starts his turn milling 2, then draws. He then taps 2 to cast Assassin's Trophy and Fog's Dreadhound, killing it, dealing 1 more damage to each of his opponents. Chris then downticks Grist to deal 8 damage to each opponent. He then goes to combat, swinging out at Justin, taking him down to 5 life, before casting Culling Ritual, getting 11 mana and gaining 4 life from Blex dying. Chris then uses 5 mana to cast Vorapede, 2 more for Demonic Tutor, and another 2 to foretell a card. Justin draws for turn and plays an island. He then taps 2 for Cranial Plating before going to combat and swinging his commander Grist, killing him. Fog draws for turn and plays a land. He then adds up all of his mana before tapping 4 in order to recast his commander Ludevic, milling a card when he enters the battlefield. Fog then taps 4 more to cast Draugr Necromancer and passes. Eddie plays a snow-covered swamp for turn, then taps out to cast Dark Salvation, creating 3 2/2 zombie tokens. He then targets Chris's Vorapede, giving him -4/-4. Chris then returns Vorapede to the field with a -1/-1 counter on it before we realize he should have been exiled with the Necromancer. Chris draws for turn, then replays his Catacombs from his graveyard before paying 1 to sack it to get a land. He then gets an insect and attempts to recast his commander before it gets countered by Justin with a counterspell. Chris then casts Bone Harvest to put all 9 of his insects back on top of his library. Justin draws for turn and plays a 5th island. He then taps 3 for a coveted prize and tutors for a card and passes. Fog plays an island for turn, then taps 7 to flip his commander over to Ulog, exiling 3 creatures from his graveyard. He then makes Ulog a copy of Leech Fanatic with 3 +1/+1 counters on him. He then taps 2 for a Guild Thief and goes to combat, swinging his commander Chris for 7. Chris blocks and Fog gains 7 life. Eddie draws for turn and plays a tap Temple of Deceit, scrying 1. Eddie then casts a distant melody of his own, picking zombies, drawing 4 cards. Eddie then casts Feed the Swarm, targeting Justin's Bloodline Keeper, which Justin then counters with a negate. Eddie then goes to combat, swinging out at Justin, who blocks all but 1 zombie, taking 2 damage. His commander goes to the command zone and 2 zombie tokens die, and he returns 2 decayed zombies to the field. Chris mills 2 cards for turn, creating an insect token. He then draws and plays a swamp before attempting to recast Grist a 3rd time, which Justin then counters again with You Find the Villain's Lair. Chris then casts Xanthrid Swarm and passes. Justin plays a Rogue's Passage for turn, then taps 2 for a Black Blade Reforged. He then pays 3 to equip the blade to his commander. He then pays 1 for a Manifold Key and goes to combat, swinging his Keeper Chris, giving his creatures -1/-1, and his commander and changeling Eddie, giving his zombies -2/-2. Eddie then takes 12 damage, including 11 commander damage. Fog draws for turn and plays a land. He then taps 2 to recast his Avalanche Caller. He then taps 6 lands, turning 3 of his lands into 4/4 elementals, and goes to combat. Fog then sends his commander Necromancer to Eddie, 1 land to Justin, and 2 lands in his Thief at Chris. And in response, Justin uses his key to untap his Commander Sphere, then taps 3 to cast Deadly Alliance to destroy Fog's land. Eddie then gets taken out, and Fog gains 7 life, while Chris takes his 9 damage. Chris draws for turn, then plays a Force from his graveyard. He then taps 7 for Giant Adaphage and 3 to recast Plex. At this point, we realize Fog's land had hexproof, therefore Justin should also be dead. Fog draws for turn, then does the math in order to tap enough lands to turn 4 of his lands into 4/4 creatures. Fog then swings out at Chris. Chris procs Ulag with his Blex, and then takes the rest of the damage, going down to 2 life, while Fog gains another 7. Chris starts his turn and mills 2 cards. He then draws for turn. He then casts a Foundry Hornet and a Caustic Caterpillar. Chris then goes to combat, swinging his Adaphage at Fog for 7, and creates another Adaphage token. Fog draws for turn to cast Gissa Glorious Resurrector. He then taps 4 to make his Thief unblockable. He then decides to go for the throw and turns another land into a creature before swinging out for the win. The big winner of today's game was Fog playing a standard-only Ludevic deck. Even though this deck was built only using cards from the current standard, it performed pretty well in today's game. So I can only imagine how effective Ludevic would be if you expanded his card pool outside of standard. The MVP of today's game goes to Avalanche Caller. Until I built this deck, I didn't realize how good his ability to make your lands into 4/4 hexproof creatures actually was. But wow, what a crazy card. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.